Well, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you this morning. And what I'm going to speak about is really the psychologic quicksand of sex trafficking. And I love the words quicksand because I think that's exactly what happens to these victims. They get in, they get sucked in slowly, and before they know it, it's almost impossible for them to leave. And unless you understand all the little bits and pieces that lead up to that, that may be hard for you to really capture and understand. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, a little bit more about the science behind why they get trapped, and then ultimately what maybe some of the answers are. I'm an emergency medicine physician, and I also am a reserve officer with Oakland County Sheriff. That's only important because I think those are two areas that are critical for us to go after for education. And I think that that is an opportunity that we need to capitalize on. It's a simple concept. The problem is a simple concept. You've already heard some of this. It's a game of supply and demand. If we remove supply or we remove demand, we fix the problem. The sick part is the product is our 12-year-old daughters and sons. And what's even worse is it's a recyclable product. If you sell drugs, you sell them once. If you steal stuff and you sell it once. This is a crime, all right? These kids are being sold over and over and over in a night. While the concept is simple, it's a very complex system of slavery that entraps our victims almost indefinitely. What we have to do is we have to get society to work on prevention, identification when we can find it, and then help those victims recover, and then give them ongoing support. It doesn't stop there. So what I'm going to talk about today is really the psychology of the predator and the buyer, the psychology that goes into the victim, the psychology of our community and why we're actually present hurdles to this process, and then maybe just a few brief possible answers on how we fix this problem. All right? Some of this has already been brought up, so I'll kind of try to move through this rapidly. But one of the problems in society is the sexualization of children. We see it all the time. It's on TVs. It's on the internet. It's a problem. I'm not saying it's the only cause of this problem, but it is an issue. It's the entry point for a lot of people. Because we know, as you've already heard, pornography is a huge problem. I recently read some stats that said there's 2.5 billion emails that go out every day that have pornography-related topics associated with them. We know that 25% of web searches are somehow related to pornography. This is huge. But the biggest problem isn't just that people do it, it's that every time they do it, it changes the chemistry in their brain. It's rewiring their brain. Their brain looks at those neurotransmitters in a different way, and it creates an addiction. And that addiction doesn't stop with looking. It continues on with going possibly to the next stage. And that's a real crime. We've already talked a little bit about internet advertising. You can go on any of these websites and within a minute purchase a child. And you have to understand that this isn't just some thug doing it. This is an orchestrated business plan. You can go on Amazon right now and you can buy this book, The 48 Laws of the Game, Pimpology. They read it, they study it, they want to be good at it, and they want to take advantage of our kids. I'm just going to go through this, and I hope that in a minute you'll understand why I'm going through some of this detail. So the predator has to recruit children, okay? Some are kidnapped, some are actually sold by their own family members. But where they will hang out is, they'll hang out in schools, they'll hang out in malls, they'll go to parties, they'll go to movie theaters. Why? Because that's where kids are. And what do they look for? They look for kids with low self-esteem. They look for kids with a desire to belong, okay? They're looking for kids that are searching for an identity, because if they find a kid that has a need and they give them that need, they capture their attention and they can suck them in. They look for unstable homes, broken families. Where do you find kids like this? Sometimes foster homes. Sometimes they're in the juvenile system, CPS. Maybe they have substance abuse problems. Those are the easy kids because they already have a need, and it makes it easy for the pimp to supply that need. Then there's what they call, once they find the child, there's a breaking in process. It involves 4 steps: seduction, isolation, a mix of coercion, violence, and control, and then a reframing process. Seduction is where they fulfill that need. So if a child wants love, they'll be the boyfriend. If they need a father figure, they'll be the daddy. If they need security, they'll provide them shelter, maybe food. Again, drugs. Once they do that, and they've, in a sense, courted the child for a while, then they start to create reliance, emotional reliance, mental reliance. They start to brainwash the child into believing, I'm the only one that really cares about you. And by doing that, then they also remove all the other child safety nets, so that the only thing the child has to fall back on is the pimp. The third phase is they have to get the child into prostitution. And this is done through that quote-unquote demonstration of love. I did this for you, now you have to do something for me. And they'll lie, they'll tell lies. Oh, it's only for a little while. Someday we're gonna be together. It's gonna be better. And that goes on, and then the physical and emotional abuse begins. And if the child pushes back, they're made to believe the whole thing is their fault. That adds more guilt and adds more complexity to the problem. And then finally, there's a reframing. They're given a street name. They're only known by that street name. As you've just heard, they're branded. That's Richie's name on her inner lip if you can't read it. All right? She now becomes property. She's an object. She starts to view her world and how the world views her differently. All right, this is a total reframe. She has an incredible sense of shame, degradation, guilt, and soon she has a new family. The family is the pimp and the other girls in the stable. Now let's go back to the psychology of the victim. So years ago when we were growing up, if I wasn't on the phone with a friend, and I was in my house, I had no contact to the outside world, really, right? I was safe. My parents knew where I was and what was going on. Now, kids are in their bedroom, kids are in the living room, they're on the internet, and they're talking to somebody they think is a 16-year-old friend, and it's a 50-year-old man. There's a level of naivety out there with kids they just don't understand, and they share too much, and there's too much out there. And this is, I think, a huge problem with human trafficking. This is a big entry point. Once the victim is brought in, they're given an ongoing diet of fear, intimidation, potential future promised, and then followed by abuse. It's this constant mix of they love them, and then they beat them. They're abused, they're raped, they're taken advantage of. They're given this false love. They're told they don't have anywhere else to go. They're told if they try to leave, they're going to go to jail. All right? They're told nobody wants you. You're only good for one thing. And uniquely enough, you've probably heard of the Stockholm Syndrome, where victims will soon create an emotional bond with their captor or the predator. And as weird as that sounds, it happens. And what that does is it adds another whole layer of complexity and takes away any more desire to leave. They're trapped. They're literally trapped. There's severe emotional and physical abuse. They all go through horrible degrees of PTSD. And you can see how very shortly they'll just become a hollow shell. Let's talk about the psychology of the community. How does the community view these people? Well, they're prostitutes, right? They're dirty. They have a choice. If she didn't want to do it, she should leave. Yeah, maybe there's a guy out there paying money, but you know what? If she wasn't out there doing it, it wouldn't be a problem. They could quit if they wanted to. That's kind of the opinion that people have. But that's totally wrong if you've listened to everything I've said up till now. That's not the way it is. And yet, the community also victimizes her. My point of going into all this detail is to really change your frame of reference if you didn't already have that, okay? The way to instill change is to look at it from a different perspective. The answer to all this change is education. You've all taken that first step already by coming here. It really is changing our community. It's educating our community. It's educating our children. For crying out loud, we tell them to look both ways before they cross the street because they might get killed. This is maybe worse. We need to really focus on especially educating people in key roles. Everybody needs education, but there are certain fields that are going to have the potential of interacting with these victims more than others. School personnel, law enforcement, medical personnel. And when I say medical personnel, I mean all medical personnel, but there are some key areas that are much more important than others. Of course, I work in an emergency department, so I'm going to be biased, right? But really, if you're a pimp, the best place to take one of the girls, if they absolutely have to, is to an emergency department. Why? Emergency departments are busy. There's 10 more people behind you waiting to be treated. Emergency departments sometimes, and urgent cares, sometimes don't ask enough questions. If it's a minor complaint, they're going to treat you and try to discharge you. Visits are tough to track. And chances are you may not see the same doc if you come into the same emergency department. So that makes tracking difficult. This is why these people are going to be exposed a lot. These folks are challenging to identify, even for emergency personnel, law enforcement that are aware of it. Why? Because these kids are physically and psychologically controlled. They rehearse lies before they come into the emergency department. Many times the pimp, or maybe the bottom girl is with them, and they are instructed what to say, what not to say, and they're threatened. If they don't do it, they're going to get beat or they're going to die. And that's what they believe, and that's why they don't trust medical personnel, and they don't trust law enforcement. And you know what? Most of them don't even know they're victims. This has become a way of life for them, and they don't even recognize how victimized they are. One of the biggest problems is they have false IDs. It's really easy in an emergency department if a minor comes in and it's obvious that they've been abused or somehow inappropriately treated, it's easy for us to take charge of that. The problem is they don't say they're minors. They come in with fake IDs, and if you're an adult, you can't make anybody do anything. What we need to do is we need to teach those people on the front line certain things. We have to look for limited eye contact, restricted or no communication, an older visitor with the patient that's answering all the questions, an older boyfriend, characteristic injuries, this branding that we talked about, inappropriate dress. These are all things that we need to teach our people on the front line how to recognize. There are certain things that we can train them to do. Separate visitors from the patient, separate them from their belongings so that the pimp can't listen in on the cell phone, okay? But the biggest thing we need to do is we need to instill a sense of safety with these folks because they are afraid, they need to feel safe. There's all kinds of external threats and internal threats, all the psychology that's been going on for years that's keeping them trapped. And it's really important to try to ask non-threatening questions and try to build a sense of rapport and trust with that person. And let me tell you what, in an emergency department, that's a tough thing to do because it's a busy, crazy place. Going forward, we need to build templates into our healthcare system so that it makes it easy for healthcare and law enforcement to get these people into a safe place and to help them go to the next step with further reporting systems and also entry into the next phase with safe houses. So I hope this review has kind of given you a little bit of a background of the psychology, giving you a little bit of an understanding of how these folks get trapped and what maybe we can start to do as individuals and as a society to fix the problem. And I'll leave you with this last comment. You may choose to look the other way, but you can never say again that you did not know. Thank you.